Hey there. I know a lot of you listen to these stories as you're passing time, winding down, or falling asleep. So before we get started, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you enjoy this kind of content. And please leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. When you're ready, get comfortable, and let's begin.
Gannon Stauch was born on September 29, 2008. His parents, Albert, or Al Stauch, and Landon Bell, were married at the time of his birth. After their divorce, custody arrangements changed over the years, and eventually, Gannon and his younger sister moved to Colorado to live primarily with their father. By 2020, Gannon was 11 years old, living in Colorado Springs with Al, his stepmother Letecia Stauch, and Letecia's teenage daughter Harley. Because of Al's work with the National Guard, he was often away, leaving Letecia responsible for the day-to-day care of the children. On Monday, January 27, 2020, Gannon didn't go to school. By that evening, he was reported missing. At 6:55 p.m., Letecia Stauch called the El Paso County Sheriff's Office. She told the dispatcher that her 11-year-old stepson, Ganon, was missing. According to Letecia, Ganon had left earlier that afternoon to go to a friend's house. He was expected home by 6 p.m. When he didn't return, she said she went looking for him. She told dispatch that she drove to the friend's house herself. Ganon wasn't there. Deputies were sent to the home in Colorado Springs to take a report. Inside the house, Letecia repeated the same account. Ganon had left between 3:15 and 4 p.m. to walk to a friend's house. When he didn't come back, she began checking nearby homes and calling around. At the time of the call, Ganon's father, Al Stauch, was out of state for work with the National Guard. He was notified and immediately began contacting friends and parents from where he was. Based on the information provided that night, Ganon was entered into the system as a juvenile runaway. As the report was taken, officers documented the timeline they were given. By that night, search efforts were already beginning in the surrounding neighborhood. The day after Ganon was reported missing, investigators sat down with Letecia Stauch to go over the timeline again. This time, she introduced a new explanation for what she said had happened inside the house the night before Ganon disappeared. According to Letecia, there had been an accident in Ganon's bedroom. She told investigators that a candle had tipped over, damaging the carpet. She said she panicked, not because of an injury, but because of the damage itself, and the thought of her husband seeing it when he returned from his work trip. Instead of reporting the damage or waiting, Letecia said she decided to try to fix it on her own. She told investigators that she and Ganon got into her vehicle and drove around the neighborhood, looking for someone who could help repair the carpet. During that drive, she said they came across a man working on a house under construction nearby. According to Letecia, the man introduced himself as Eduardo. She told investigators she spoke with him about the damaged carpet and asked if he could help fix it. According to her account, Eduardo agreed. Letecia told investigators she gave him the garage door code, allowing him to enter the home later. After returning home, Letecia said she and Ganon were inside the house when she began hearing noises coming from the garage area.
According to Letecia, when she went to check on what was happening, the situation escalated. She told investigators the man attacked her. She described being restrained, said the man was armed, and said she was assaulted. She then told investigators that Ganon was attacked as well. In this version of events, Letecia said the man abducted Ganon after the attack and left with him. This account marked a significant shift from what she had told law enforcement the night before. Investigators listened as Letecia described the sequence of events: the carpet damage, the decision to find help, the garage code, the attack, and the abduction. As the interview continued, detectives told Letecia they needed to collect evidence to support her account and requested a forensic examination. Letecia initially refused. She said she needed to shower, eat, and rest. Investigators explained that showering would destroy potential evidence, and that preserving her condition was critical if her account was accurate. Letecia became increasingly uncooperative. Eventually, investigators told her she was no longer free to leave, and that they had obtained a warrant to conduct forensic testing. At that point, Letecia began complaining of chest pains. Emergency medical services were called. She was evaluated and cleared, but she continued requesting to be taken to the hospital for further examination. She was transported to the hospital. Letecia did not remain there long. After being transported for chest pain, she left before any forensic sexual assault examination could be completed. No exam was performed. After that, Investigators documented a clear change.
As the tension around the case intensified, Letecia agreed to speak publicly. She sat down with a local news reporter as questions and accusations circulated online. During the interview, Letecia focused largely on herself, on how she said she was being treated, on the accusations being made against her, and on the emotional strain she claimed they had caused. She spoke about wanting Ganon to come home so that the accusations would stop, so that people would owe her apologies. She insisted she had cooperated with law enforcement and repeated that she would never harm him. She did not provide new information about Ganon's whereabouts. At times, she spoke about Ganon as if he would return. At other moments, she referred to him in the past tense. Behind the scenes, investigators were already documenting increasing difficulty working with her. After that point, Letecia stopped cooperating. She did not return to provide additional statements and did not assist further with search efforts. Communication slowed, then stopped altogether. As the investigation continued, law enforcement began recording phone calls between Letecia and Al. Al agreed to cooperate, hoping that if Letecia kept talking, she might finally say something that led them to Ganon. Instead, the stories kept changing. In these calls, Letecia no longer focused on the intruder scenario she had described earlier. She began introducing new explanations for what she claimed had happened on the day Ganon disappeared. One of the first involved an outing she said she and Ganon took together. She told Al they had gone out looking for a bike, first claiming Ganon just test riding, then claiming that it was intended as a gift for Al. It was during that trip she claimed Ganon had been seriously injured. She said he fell. She described blood. She talked about scrapes and bad wounds. The way she told it, the injury was serious enough to explain why blood might be found in the house, but not serious enough to explain why Ganon was gone. As Al pressed for details, where this happened, how badly Ganon was hurt, why no one had seen them, the story shifted again. Letecia began introducing names. She talked about a man she claimed was involved, sometimes referring to him as Eduardo, other times as Quincy Brown. In some versions, she said this man had come to the house to help her. In others, she claimed he had taken Ganon. At different points, she told Al this person was a known criminal, that he had a violent past, and that he was now threatening her. She said he knew where she lived, knew her family, and was coming after her because she knew who he really was. The role this person played shifted depending on the version of the story, but one thing never changed. She insisted she was not responsible. At times, Letecia told Al she knew exactly who had Ganon and could identify the person by name. At other times, she said she didn't know where Ganon was at all. She claimed someone was holding Ganon for money, then later suggested the same person had taken him to avoid being exposed. When Al asked direct questions, who exactly this person was, where they were, why police hadn't been told, her answers became circular. She repeated names, changed details, and moved on before anything concrete could be pinned down. Then the stories became even more complicated. Letecia began describing being pulled into situations involving other people she said she didn't know. In one version, she told Al she had encountered a woman she initially believed was pregnant. She later claimed the woman wasn't pregnant at all and was part of something larger. Letecia said she was instructed to go into a store and act normal, then leave with the woman afterward. She talked about money, being asked to transport things, and being caught up in what she described as criminal activity she didn't understand and didn't want to be involved in. The details shifted from call to call, but the overall message stayed the same. She was scared, she was being threatened, and everything that happened was someone else's doing. Throughout these calls, Letecia repeatedly asked Al to trust her. She wanted reassurance. She asked whether he would stand by her. She framed the situation as something that had happened to her, something that had spiraled beyond her control. When Al pushed back, asking why the stories kept changing, asking how any of it explained Ganon being gone, she either redirected or introduced another detail. Investigators listening to the calls noted the pattern. Each new version appeared to account for a specific problem, blood that might be found, places she had traveled, names that had already surfaced. Questions Al was asking. Pieces of truth were mixed into larger explanations that couldn't be verified. By this point, Letecia had told multiple, conflicting accounts involving accidents, strangers, kidnappings, and criminal activity. None of them lined up completely with the others, and none of them led to Ganon. The phone calls continued, but the information stopped moving the search forward.
What they revealed instead was how far Letecia was willing to go to redirect blame, and how many different stories she was prepared to tell to do it.
While Letecia continued telling different versions of events to Al, investigators worked to verify what could be independently confirmed. A break came from just a few houses away. A neighbor named Roderick Drayton lived close enough to the Stauch home that his surveillance camera partially captured the driveway and street. As the search for Ganon intensified, Drayton reviewed footage from the morning of January 27th. The video showed Letecia and Ganon leaving the house together that morning. Ganon walked from the house to the vehicle, got inside, and the two drove away. Hours later, the same camera recorded Letecia returning to the house alone. Ganon was not with her. The timestamps on the footage conflicted with the initial account Letecia had given law enforcement about Ganon leaving on his own to go to a friend's house.
According to the video, Ganon left the home in a vehicle with Letecia and did not return.
Investigators obtained a copy of the footage and confirmed its authenticity. They also showed the video to Al. After seeing the footage, it became clear that the last confirmed sighting of Ganon showed him leaving the house with Letecia earlier that day. From that point forward, investigators focused on the movements captured on the camera, the departure, the length of time Letecia was gone, and the fact that she returned alone. The footage established something critical. The last time Ganon was seen alive, he was with Letecia, and that video became one of the most important pieces of evidence in the case. As investigators worked behind the scenes, Ganon's parents were doing what they could publicly. Al Stauch and Ganon's biological mother, Landon, spoke out together, urging anyone with information to come forward. They appeared in interviews and recorded a joint video message, addressing the public directly. Landon described the uncertainty of not knowing where her son was and pleaded for anyone who had seen or heard anything to contact authorities. Al echoed that plea, asking people to focus on helping bring Ganon home rather than spreading rumors. They emphasized that Ganon did not simply disappear and that someone, somewhere, knew what had happened. Their messages were emotional but direct, centered on one goal: finding Ganon and bringing him back. After investigators documented the growing number of inconsistencies in Letecia's statements, reviewed the surveillance footage, and listened to the recorded phone calls, they returned to the Stauch home with a new purpose. The case was no longer centered on locating a missing child, but on determining what had happened inside the house. This time, investigators conducted a forensic examination, rather than a simple walkthrough. In Ganon's bedroom, they immediately noted the strong odor of cleaning products. Using forensic testing, they located blood that had not been visible during the initial response. Blood was identified on the wall near Ganon's bed, on the carpet, and beneath the carpet padding, where it had soaked into the concrete. The areas suggested an attempt to clean or conceal what had occurred. Samples were collected and submitted for testing, which later confirmed the blood belonged to Ganon. Investigators documented the quantity and distribution of the blood and concluded it could not be explained by a minor injury. With those findings, investigators formally reclassified the case as a homicide investigation. With the case now officially classified as a homicide, investigators moved quickly to formalize what they had gathered. They compiled the surveillance footage, the recorded phone calls, Letecia's shifting statements, vehicle data, and the forensic findings from the house into a probable cause affidavit. The affidavit laid out a timeline investigators believe showed that Ganon was injured inside the home on the day he was reported missing, and that Letecia's explanations for his disappearance changed repeatedly as the investigation progressed.
Based on that evidence, on February 28, 2020, a judge approved a warrant for Letecia Stauch's arrest on charges related to the murder of her stepson.
At the time the warrant was issued, Ganon's body had still not been found.
2 days later, on March 2nd, Letecia was located and taken into custody in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina.
She was held without bond while arrangements were made for her extradition back to Colorado. Even as the arrest was announced, investigators made it clear that the search for Ganon continued. The warrant marked a major step in the case, but it did not answer the most pressing question that remained: where Ganon was, and what had happened after he left the house for the last time. Even after Letecia Stauch was arrested, the most important question remained unanswered. Ganon had still not been found. Investigators continued working across state lines, retracing Letecia's movements in the days after Ganon was reported missing. They reviewed vehicle data, travel records, and surveillance footage tied to her trip east after leaving Colorado. On March 17, 2020, nearly 2 months after Ganon disappeared, that question was finally answered. A construction worker with the Florida Department of Transportation was working near the Escambia River Bridge in Pace, Florida, when he noticed a suitcase that had washed ashore. Inside were the remains of a child. Authorities were notified, and the remains were later identified as Gannon Stauch. The location was more than 1,300 miles from Ganon's home in Colorado Springs. Investigators announced the discovery publicly, confirming what they had already come to believe, that Ganon had been killed shortly after he was last seen, and that his body had been transported across the country. With the discovery of Ganon's remains, the scope of the case widened again. Investigators now had to determine not only how he had been killed, but how his body had been moved undetected during an active, nationwide search. the focus shifted to Letecia's travel after Ganon disappeared and how she was able to carry out those movements while maintaining multiple, conflicting stories about what had happened. After Ganon's remains were identified, investigators began reconstructing how they ended up in Florida. The probable cause affidavit and later testimony outlined what they believed happened after Ganon was killed. According to investigators, Letecia initially concealed Ganon's body in the garage of the Colorado Springs home, placing it in the trunk of her vehicle. The following night, she picked up Al from the airport after his work trip, parking her car there and switching to a rental vehicle before later returning to retrieve her own car. Using vehicle data, investigators tracked her movements south of Colorado Springs to a rural area in Douglas County, where a piece of particle board containing Ganon's blood was later recovered. Investigators believe this was part of an early attempt to dispose of evidence. At some point after her initial interview with law enforcement, investigators determined that Letecia returned to retrieve Ganon's remains. According to court testimony from her brother, Dakota Lowry, this occurred while the investigation was still ongoing and law enforcement activity surrounded the home. Lowry testified that he had flown to Colorado to help Letecia move out of the house after her relationship with Al deteriorated. While packing, he noticed Letecia struggling with a suitcase and offered to help. She refused, telling him it contained softball equipment. Lowry later testified that he immediately suspected the truth. Investigators concluded that this suitcase was the same one later found in Florida, containing Ganon's remains. Rental records showed that Letecia had rented a Kia Sedona van, which investigators believe she used to transport the suitcase across state lines. Travel data, surveillance footage, and mileage records placed her moving east over the following days. Investigators determined that she rented a hotel room in Florida before driving to the Escambia River Bridge in Pace. According to the affidavit, she disposed of the suitcase by throwing it from the bridge into the river, where it later washed ashore. The act was carried out while Ganon was the subject of a nationwide search, and after Letecia had already been identified as a person of interest. The discovery of the suitcase provided the final confirmation of what investigators had been piecing together, how Ganon's body was moved across the country and concealed during an active investigation. This act closed the search for Ganon, but it opened the final stage of the case, accountability for what had been done, and the legal process that followed. In April 2023, after more than 3 years of investigation, pretrial motions, evaluations, and delays, Letecia Stauch stood trial in Colorado for the murder of her stepson, Gannon Stauch. Prosecutors presented forensic evidence, digital records, surveillance footage, and recorded statements, laying out a detailed timeline of events that began inside the Stauch home and ended more than 1,000 miles away in Florida.
Experts testified that Gannon Stauch's cause of death was multiple traumatic injuries, including blunt force trauma, sharp force injuries, and a gunshot wound, inflicted by his stepmother.
Central to the case were the multiple versions Letecia had given over time, the physical evidence recovered from the home and other locations, and the steps investigators said she took to conceal what had happened. Letecia entered a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. The defense argued that she suffered from a severe mental illness that rendered her incapable of forming criminal intent at the time of the killing. During the trial, experts testified about her mental health, her behavior before and after Ganon's death, and whether her actions were consistent with someone unable to understand right from wrong. The prosecution countered with evidence showing planning, cleanup, deception, and efforts to evade law enforcement, arguing that her actions demonstrated awareness and intent. The jury rejected the insanity defense. Letecia Stauch was found guilty of first-degree murder, child abuse resulting in death, tampering with a deceased human body, and tampering with physical evidence. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, along with additional consecutive sentences for the remaining charges. Following the verdict, Ganon's family spoke about him publicly, remembering him as a kind, loving child who was deeply missed. Court proceedings moved forward in the standard post-conviction process, with filings related to sentencing and appeals handled through the legal system. Letecia Stauch remains in custody under a life sentence. Despite attempts at appeals claiming mishandling of her case, her conviction remains in effect, and she will spend the rest of her life behind bars.